Hello and welcome to the Bottom Line Extra here on TVP World. I'm your host, Marie Cato. Europe is juggling its defence and economic priorities with new uncertainties and some developments cropping up every day. This week, the EU has approved the safe loan for member states to boost defence. In parallel, it's unclear to what extent the EU and the US will succeed in negotiating any tariff cuts and what this means for international trade. To explore these topics and others, I have the pleasure of welcoming Brigitte Granville, Professor of International Economics and Economic Policy at the School of Business and Management at Queen Mary University of London and Head of Business Analytics and Applied Economics Department. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I wanted to begin by asking you about your thoughts about the upcoming trade negotiations between the EU and the US. Is it going to be just a very shallow deal in your mind? Because it really has some very challenging issues at stake, like the food standards, for example. This hasn't been resolved since the TTIP talks. And just for our viewers, TTIP stands for the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnerships, a free trade agreement between the US and EU, which has never been finalized.
Yeah, I think before we go into that, we should give some little bit of background of where the negotiations stand. So the issue is that on 2nd of April, the US imposed a 10% baseline tariff on all imports, plus a 25% tariff on certain strategic sectors such as cars, steel and aluminium, and also plans to extend those tariffs to pharmaceutical, semiconductors and lumber. Those measures obviously apply to all trading partners. But the issue is for the EU is that in addition, the EU has imposed a 10% tariff specifically on the EU based on its trade surplus. And there is, but this for the moment has been suspended until July the 8th. So the negotiations and the issue is to see if this issue can be resolved. And the negotiation outlook, so what is it? So Europe, the position of Europe is essentially to seek a deal. And that is unlike the position of China, which has rather held off on immediate retaliation. So the main goal of the EU is to negotiate this removal of the additional 10%. And to achieve that, he will offer mutual concession on strategic sector tariff. A bit similar, if you want, to what has taken place with the UK on the 9th of May. And by agreeing to tariff-free quota for certain goods. So what the EU hope and commit is, for instance, to increase purchases of US products such as military equipment, liquefied natural gas, and so that is a position of the EU. Now, what is the position of Trump? What is his agenda? If we look at the example of the UK deal, it shows that the team Trump wants to keep, in fact, this baseline 10% import tariff in place anyway. But the EU is extremely reluctant to accept this and may aim to get around by negotiating special deals on individual products. And the idea here is reducing the real effective average tariff below 10%. So Trump, his position, for instance, is that what he really wants is to avoid is that China use the EU as a kind of backdoor for its export. And so what he wants as well from the EU is that they raise their trade barriers against China, and he would like also that the EU scale back on its planned carbon border adjustment mechanism. Now, that is the solution, the situation for the two parties. Now, what happens if there is no deal? If we arrive at the 9th of July and there is no deal, and there is a risk, this will trigger a summer of uncertainty for Europe. If that happens, the EU could impose some retaliatory tariff, or more drastically pivot trade towards China, but obviously the EU is not very keen on that because it will have all kind of political risk. So more likely if the negotiations fail, EU would offer deeper concession to Trump to offer that. In a really no-deal scenario, at this point, the EU will probably target US service export, where the US hold a huge trade surplus, like big tech, put pressure on big tech using the Digital Markets and Digital Service Act.
But by the looks of it, it does seem that Trump is less willing to negotiate with the EU. It doesn't seem there doesn't seem to be much communication between the EU and the Trump administration on that front. He's already spoken to China. It seems to be very quick in terms of striking a deal with the UK. Do you think the chances of negotiations succeeding are rather low, essentially?
The point is exactly as you said, is that the Trump and the Trump administration is quite hostile to Europe. He claims that for Trump, the EU is even nastier than China because they have this huge trade surplus. So he accused the EU to have used when there was a Cold War, you remember the model was that because that America opened its market to the allies, to the European allies under its security umbrella, and Trump thinks that the European has abused this position. Yeah.
So this is some form of punishment.
Well,
revenge.
I think. It's not that for Trump, it's America first. And I think the message he wants to give is that it's time for the Europeans maybe to think Europe first as well. So therefore, to not depend so much on the EU, whether it's in terms of defense, of trade.
Okay, now moving back a little bit to Europe, the EU Commission has recently released a strategy working towards boosting the bloc's single market to yet again eliminate anything getting in the way of trade between the 27 member states, goods and services. And I wanted to ask your thoughts on the tighter integration of EU's internal market when it comes to goods, services and financial matters. What are your thoughts?
Good luck. Well, what I mean here is that there is a lot of opposition. I mean, the shift that we may see effectively is that there will be a shift of priorities. I mean, the EU was really targeting redistribution between member states. And now it will probably shift towards strategic priorities like inspired by the Draghi report, like competitiveness, digital infrastructure, green transition, defense. But there will be some political resistance. Parliament, to implement this kind of vision. The parliament is a bit more right-leaning than it was in the past. It will be hard to expand the budget or agree on joint borrowing. and balancing all priorities like cohesion, agriculture with new ones, like defense and tech, will create tension. So especially in this world of global instability with the US protectionism, the China rivalry and Ukraine war. So I don't think it's going to be very smooth.
Now, I wanted to turn to your paper that you wrote upon the request of former Polish President Lech Wałęsa, and this paper will form a book that's published by the European Financial Congress that is taking place next week in Poland. And I want to touch upon a few themes that you raised there. So I wanted to ask you, how important, in your opinion, is the level of democracy for potential investors when they consider the rate of return on their investments?
They always factor they always factor political risk. With democracies, they are generally seen as lower risk. They offer better long-term value. So most capital is managed by professionals. They maximize return, but within legal and ethical values, a limit. Investment falls basically into two categories: financial, so like portfolio, and strategic, that is the asset acquisition. And here in the book, I mainly talk about the financial investment. But, criteria like environmental, social, governance, especially governance are extremely important. And that comes with democratic stability and rule of law, because they reduce risk. Yeah.
And I also wanted to ask, when it comes to political risks, and perhaps you could tell us a little bit about, we could perhaps give us some examples, how do they play a role in terms of investment decisions now, like you mentioned, now that environmental, social and governmental factors play such a role in making those decisions?
Well, it's, if it can be factored in different ways. There is, even if there is no, how could I say, even if there is no law against investing in some countries, like countries under sanction, there is always a reputational risk, and that is very important for investors.
And also in your analysis, you make it clear that you don't necessarily consider investments in authoritarian regimes a means of rewarding them. So can you just talk us through your thought process?
What do you mean? I didn't get that.
So in your paper, you don't consider investing in a country where there is an authoritarian regime. You don't necessarily consider that as a signal that it's a reward for that country. So you don't necessarily say we mustn't ever invest in countries where there is a non-democratic regime. And I just wanted to ask you if you could just elaborate on that for our viewers.
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, if we see what is happening around the world, for instance, look at Cuba, look at Iran. All those countries, there's huge embargo, huge sanctions, for years and years. They're still not democratic. In another way, when effectively you can see you have some investment that boosts speed information, it boosts entrepreneurship, it builds economic ties. And at the end, that is a better thing you can do. There is this kind of demonstration effect. If the well-established democracy shows to the other that they are successful in terms of high growth, and they become this demonstration effect, the others want to follow. The people of that country, they don't want anymore to be in this autocratic regime.
Okay. Professor Brigitte Granville, thank you so much for joining us today on the Bottom Line Extra.
Thank you. I hope it was okay. It's all.
It was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Many thanks for joining us on The Bottom Line Extra today. Don't forget to join us for our regular episode of The Bottom Line at 5:10 CET on weekdays. And in the meantime, for the latest in regional business, follow us on X and on tvpworld.com. Goodbye.